Hi, I'm Colleen Camuccio. I'm from Dow Jones. Specifically, I'm from the customer data team at Dow Jones, and my department is responsible for all of our customer data across the entire company. That includes our customer data from our consumer products, like Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and MarketWatch. It includes all of our customer data for our B2B products, like Factiva and Risk and Compliance. And it also includes data for around a lot of our advertising propositions that we offer our clients on Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and MarketWatch. And our team is responsible for collecting all of that information and making it available to the rest of the company. So exactly 2 years today, we embarked on an adventure to create a brand new customer data platform. We heard a lot of different things from the folks that we service throughout the business. They were having problems getting the data that they were looking for. The data had multiple versions of the truth throughout the company. There was limited visibility into the things they were looking for, wasted time trying to find it, and they were really struggling to get to what they needed. And our infrastructure that housed our existing enterprise data warehouse was old, it's end of life, and really wasn't able to scale the way that we needed to keep up with the business demand. And I don't think any of these problems are unique to our company. I think everybody here in the room, if you've ever talked to your clients about problems with old architecture, that they've had the same issues. So we set out to build a brand new platform, and we really wanted to change the game around how we use data in the company. We wanted to morph from being a cost generator and turn into a revenue generator. And we really wanted to be first in class around how people use our data to power their business decisions. And our approach was very interesting because in order to create our environment, we decided to create what we called the Environmental Council. We grabbed folks from AWS, we grabbed folks from around our company, either folks that worked with data directly or folks that worked with data indirectly, and we partnered with a few consultancies to put together a group of folks who were really smart and really ahead of the game on what our architecture could look like. And from there, we created what our platform architecture would look like. When we set out to really go and build it, we didn't want to jump right to the fancy stuff. We knew that we needed to crawl before we walked, before we ran. So we took a very slow-moving approach to building the platform, where we started with just getting everything into one place, visualizing it, bringing more data in so that we could do some of the trending, bringing in more attributes so we could get to the clustering, and then eventually we would be able to get to the predictive analytics, the really cool stuff. And at the onset of the project, we knew that we wanted to get to that last stage. So our vision for the platform was that we would make everything AI ready. So we did have a sight into what we wanted to do towards the end. So a data lake, as we all know, is just a place where you can put all of your information. But for us, a data lake is more than just a dumping ground for info. For us, in order for the information to be valuable to our users throughout the company, we wanted to make sure that the data, once it made it into the platform, was cleansed, that it was formatted, that it was labeled, that it was keyed, so that it was very easily used by our end users. And we could take a lot of that data prep and data cleansing steps out of the entire process and have folks really focus on the analytics. But even though we were in a big data architecture, we didn't want to lose sight of some of the more traditional data warehousing concepts. So we did not forget about the idea of a data mart. For us, we thought that even though our users had the data lake available to them, that there were still reasons for creating the general concept of a data mart. Places where we knew there was a lot of business rules, places where these business rules were constantly applied. So if we didn't want our users to have to consistently put these filters on the data, we would create a data mart. And there were a lot of reasons for creating some additional aggregations that were really valuable to our users. So any of those times where there was business rules aggregation, we decided that we would go and set out to build a mart that would make the data easily understandable by our users. So this looks familiar. It's a standard AWS reference architecture chart, and there's a lot of AWS services on here. But I want to hone in on the things that are the most important to us. So our data moves from on-premises into our AWS landing zone. Our key services on this chart are our S3 buckets. Our S3 buckets are where we deposit all of our data, and we have a very sophisticated bucket strategy that we employ to make sure that the data is organized in the appropriate way and helps to make sure that data is accessed by the right users. In order to move the data through the different buckets and organize it and cleanse it, we're using EMR with Spark to do all of the transformation through our landing all the way to our warehouse. We use Airflow for orchestration, so we've integrated Airflow with EMR so that we can run our jobs on a scheduled basis. We're using Glue for our catalog and for making sure that all the data is labeled properly. And then finally, our landing place for all of our data is Redshift. And we're using Redshift and Redshift Spectrum to give our users the ability to query the data. So I mentioned earlier that we didn't completely abandon some of the general ideas around data warehousing. So when coming up with our bucket structure, we organize our data in the different areas that you would normally see in a traditional data warehouse. We have our landing area where all the data drops. We have our staging area. This is where we do the formatting, the transfer to Parquet, and where we do a lot of our initial labeling. And we will do a lot of change data capture in this area so that we can make sure that as the data is changing from day to day, that we're capturing all of those changes so we can do historical analysis and do some really cool things with regression. But we also decided that we were going to make sure that we had clean areas for any place where we wanted to do some warehousing of the data. So if we wanted to apply the concept of data marts, we also have different buckets for the final transformed areas. And then anything that we want to put as an actual warehouse table in Redshift, we have a special area for that within our bucket strategy as well. So from a cost perspective, everything lives in S3. We have logs that in our S3 buckets so that we can watch how the data is transformed over time. And the key to querying this information in S3 is not really Athena, but it is actually Redshift. And that was a really important decision factor for us. We decided to use Redshift as our analytical database, not because of its analytical capabilities, which are awesome, but a lot of it had to do with user permissioning. We are dealing with customer data, and we didn't want to make our data fully available to everybody. So a lot of the permissioning that's available within Redshift really met our needs. Just giving people access to the S3 buckets wasn't enough. Within Redshift, we're able to permission users to specific schemas, or we're able to permission them specific tables, and we're able to create the tables with a specific structure so that if we needed to hide certain variables, like very sensitive customer information, we could do so. And with the power of Redshift and the power of Redshift Spectrum, we were able to do all that at a low cost. So our Redshift instance is actually very small, and we utilize the power of Glue to make sure that we've defined all of our tables and done all of that permissioning. Here is where we then decided to come up with some of the tools that we were going to give people access to. So now we knew where we were going to store our data. We really have a variety of ways that we could give users access to the data. We could take any number of BI tools and connect them directly to Redshift without having to worry about any of that permissioning problem or people getting their hands on the data that they weren't supposed to. So by permissioning a schema, giving a user to Tableau, we were able to visualize all of the data within Redshift and make that available to our customers. Or we could really give our end users the ability to query the data directly. As long as they picked any tool that had a JDBC connector to the Redshift database itself, they could go in and they could query the data and they could generate any insight they were looking for. So within Redshift, we have a variety of different areas. So we've organized our schema based on customer data content. The very first area that we focused on was the information about the customer's contract with us, whether it be their individual contract because they have a subscription, or it be a general B2B contract because the company has contracted with us to make our data available to our end users. All of that information is stored and standardized. We capture information about our users' interactions with our products. So we have anonymous clickstream data that we capture from the Wall Street Journal and Barron's, and we can make that information available on a super granular level in terms of actual clicks on the site, rolled all the way up to more aggregated metrics around a person's daily usage, daily habits. We capture the information around browsers and device-level information. So we have a lot of really interesting dimensions within that data. Another really interesting data set that we have within Redshift is our customer interaction data. So we can record, just based on phone calls, any time a customer calls into us because they're complaining about a wet paper on their doorstep or because they're having a problem logging into the product. We can also record any of the campaigns or touch points that we're pushing out to them if we're sending them emails. So we have a really rich data set around how customers interact with us, the channels that they're interested in, and what messages are best pushed out to those customers and what they react to. And our last, and I think the most interesting data set that we've captured within Redshift is our first-party data. Throughout your journey with the Wall Street Journal or Barron's or MarketWatch or even some of our B2B products, you can provide us information at different points of your customer lifecycle. One of the key areas is if you decide you're going to sign up for a conference or a WSJ Plus event. So in that time frame, you can usually give us your job title, your industry, information about you as a person. So we take this information and we store it within our data lake. And I may interact with the Wall Street Journal a variety of different times in my tenure with them over time. I may have signed up for 3 different events and filled out a form because I wanted to get access to something on MarketWatch. So within the data lake, we store the source of the first-party data, where we captured it and when. And within that, we've churned through the information and gone through a hierarchical process where I make sure that the data that I'm surfacing to our end users is the most freshest information you've provided to us, and also is from the most trusted source. And then even further, because we could have a different listing of job titles over time because the industries change, move, and shake, we have a standardization process so that we can make sure that all the data points are standardized to make it very easy for the end users to pull C-level individuals and come up with some of the insights around that. And that's one of my favorite areas because it's a really good use of how we store data in the data lake and a really good use case for coming up with why you would want to come up with a Mart, because it's the business rule, the aggregation, the standardization that makes it really, really easy for a user to go in and query. On the B2B side, we have what we call our analytical sandbox, and it's the underlying data that we've captured from the contracts down to how users are using the product and all the way up to customer service interactions on that side as well. And it's not the underlying data that I find to be the most fascinating. It is the visualization that we created out of the data that has now become a key element to the sales pipeline. I, as a sales rep, can pull up this dashboard and I can see a complete 360-degree view of what my client's relationship is with Dow Jones. So when I go out into the market and I have these ongoing calls with our customers, I know what areas of the site they're using, so I know what kind of upsell I can give. I know where customers are not using the site, so I can give them suggestions on how their employees could better engage with our products. And I have a really good view on where those particular pain points and positive points are, so that when it comes time for retention, I can have a very educated conversation and improve overall customer retention. And our last really interesting area is this project we call DASH. It stands for Digital Analytics Service Hub. It is a really state-of-the-art campaign performance reporting platform that we've just recently developed that we're now making available to our advertisers in the market. At any given time, as an advertiser, you could just plaster our site with a variety of different ads, or we could come up with some custom curated content and push that out and have it sponsored. These dashboards are a really clear way of giving you, the client, a really good understanding of how the ads are performing, how viewable it is, how many impressions you're getting, how people are clicking on it, if they're sharing it, if it's falling below the fold and maybe you're not reaching what those industry standard benchmarks are. So this is a really cool tool that we're releasing internally for all of our sales folks, all of our sales planners, so that we can be really smart about things we push out into market and have a really good conversation with our clients around what is working, what is not working, and giving them a really good performance indicator. Oh, it started all over again. Apologies. There we go. So for those users that do just want to go in and get a hold of the data on their own, outside of providing a data catalog for them, we give them a couple of really good hints and tips about how to really get the best performance out of Redshift. And by using Redshift and Spectrum, they can get to data that's stored in S3, in addition to data that might be stored as physical tables within Redshift. And we tell them that Redshift has things that it does really, really, really well, and that you can't really go out and do a select star. You have to be very smart about the columns you're interested in. That it's really good at aggregation, so when you're writing your queries, you really need to make sure that you're using group by statements. You have to use with clauses instead of subqueries to really get the best performance so that your queries aren't hanging. That aggregated queries are what it does best, as opposed to performing millions and millions of records, which nobody is really looking at millions of records. They're really only looking at a small subset to get an idea of what data is in the set that they've filtered. So we tell them that they should be really limiting this size by doing a limit of 100, limit of 10, browsing the data, getting an understanding of it, and then refining their filter so that they can get to a smaller, easily manageable data set. And the key to the bucket strategy, the key to the cataloging, the labeling, and the querying is all about the data partitions. So working with our engineers, we're really smart about how we partition our data, and we make sure that we're very clear and transparent to our end users about how it's partitioned so that they can always use those data partitions in their queries to get the best performance. So I talked about the crawl, walk, run strategy that we employed. And right now, I would say we are jogging. We're not quite running. We're not sprinting. But we're really, really picking up speed in the spaces that we want to. So we're getting ready to embark on more AI and predictive analytics. And we really want to focus on the tool set. Now that we have the data, the platform is done, we're just finding new and cool areas where we can bring more data in and building out that breadth of dimensions and the breadth of history. So for us, the next thing we're going to be doing is focusing on the tools that we can be making available to users to start to build, train, and deploy models using our customer data in the platform. So I have another eye chart on here, but what this chart is showing you is that our architecture is really harnessing the power of SageMaker. Nobody in our company yet has used it. We are on the bleeding edge in terms of technology here at Dow Jones, and we're really, really excited to put this in and make this available to users, because we don't want our data scientists to have to understand some of the nitty-gritty nuances of EMR and Spark and how to ramp up the resources, and we really want them to focus on the things that they do best. So by having this AI-ready data, giving them a tool that will manage the resources on the back end, and giving them the data that we've now made available, we're giving them a really cool playground for them to start to build, train, and eventually deploy models. So for us, it's all about giving them the information available, but we don't want them to be able to edit anything that we've put out there, because this is the system or the source of truth for everybody throughout the company. So we give them the read-only access, but we're now creating something that we call an analyst sandbox by giving them their own S3 bucket to play around in the data. We've done a lot of the labeling, we've done a lot of the preparing, but we do know that in order to create a model, they're going to need to curate create their own data sets. They're going to want to pare down the number of variables. They're going to create their own flags. So by giving them read access to the data warehouse, but giving them write access to their own bucket, they'll be able to do that. And utilizing the Jupyter Notebook in concert with SageMaker, they'll be able to visualize and churn through some of that data in creating their model. So at the end of the day, we have a lot of adoption of our platform, which I'm really excited to talk about. We have over 118 terabytes of data, and it's growing. Every day, as we're generating more history, we're growing out the breadth of our data and the dimensions, and we're focusing on some of the really, really new cutting-edge aspects of data in our company. We're able to take that. We've spun up about 30 different fact tables. So I said we haven't gotten completely away from the idea of data warehousing. So we do have a good number of Marts that our users are using. Those 30 fact tables power 12 different dashboards, and that number is growing. Every day we have users who are coming to us who are looking for a new way to visualize the data. And by now, we have over 100 users who are accessing just those 12 dashboards that I've mentioned. So there's really cool things to come, and we're really, really excited about this platform. Are there any questions? Yes.
Are you storing any of the comments that they're making on your content? Are you planning to do any NLP processing affiliated with sort of the customer profile?
That is a very good question. So commenting is a very interesting area on the Wall Street Journal. There have been a couple of recent enhancements to improve the overall commenting experience. And that itself has been really exciting. So we've been able to monitor different interactions with comments over time. The data that we've collected so far is really connected to customer. But our next phase is going to be getting more of the content-related information to overlay on top of the customer info. And with some of these cooler tools that we're making available, it is possible to do some NLP over top of that and really understand some of the sentiment around the articles from a customer perspective. But we could also use the same tools to think a little bit about the overall arching sentiment of the article itself. There's a whole number of possibilities by simply bringing that kind of information in. Yes?
One question I have is, what was the legacy system like, and what did it take to change the mindset to get to where you are today?
Well, our legacy platform was DB2. We use DataStage for all of our transformation, and everything is on-prem. So we never even got to that middle ground where we maybe had our DB2 database in the cloud. Everything still lives on premises. You can see that we haven't really gotten away from a lot of the traditional data warehousing concepts. So there was a middle ground that we all kind of merged to in order to kind of get to where we are today. And there was a lot of change and transformation that had to happen on the internal teams to really think about, to change their mindsets, because we do have a breadth of new possibilities, a breadth of new ways of storing and accessing data that we've never had before because of this. And for our developers, there is an exciting opportunity for them to learn new languages, new technologies that they've never been able to learn before. So from a transformation perspective, by focusing on the cool new things, we've been able to have them, bring everybody to kind of the same common ground, while still holding on to some of the more traditional concepts, which I do believe are necessary even in big data. Yes?
On the rejected records you had, do you go back to the source and change, or do you curate going forward on those records that were not good in the beginning? You did, validation checks?
We hold our source system owners to very high standards. So in many, many cases, if we get records back that don't fit the way they're supposed to, we get weird values sometimes. They don't have the right, text versus numerical, we make them give us new files, and we will reprocess our data again. In the past, it was harder to do so on our legacy system, but it becomes easier to do so the way we've structured our buckets and with the EMR jobs. But that's not to say that There are places where we can do better by curating the data and bringing it together. There are the hand-entered systems like the Salesforces of the world, where people enter in company names, different spellings, and versus ampersand. And that's where I think we can add some value, because you can't necessarily go back to the end users, but we could do a lot of standardization on our own end to bring and standardize a lot of that data. I mean, a really good example is the first-party data mart I mentioned, where there's a whole job that runs that takes CTO and chief technology officer and standardizes it to a common variable so that it's easier to query. I think you were raising your hand.
So when you were aggregating this data lake, did you ever run into any regulatory aspects that, yeah, we need to maintain this traceability, or was that a driver towards your business case towards making such aggregation available, that you'd have better control and visibility on all your data, and then you could be more compliant to GDPR, those kind of things? Or you don't have any customer data in this? You do have customer data in this, right?
We do have some customer data. A lot of what we capture is anonymized, so we can't get too far deep into it. But because it is customer data, everything that you've just mentioned really guided a lot of our decision making. It was one of the biggest reasons that we went with Redshift over Athena. And there is a lot of logging that we've enabled. We made sure that we picked tools to access the data that have its own logging mechanism. We use a lot of the logging mechanisms within Redshift so that we can keep track of who is accessing what. I mean, there's a line. There's only so much that we can do from a platform, and we do leave a lot of it in the hands of our end users. But we also have a lot of hashing mechanisms that prevent end users from getting a hand on any real customer data as well. So between those major things, I think we're really staying mainly compliant. And in the cases where we just can't have the data, we don't. Yes?
Did you work with an outside consultancy or agency or just Amazon professional services to make this happen? Or is it all internal engineers?
It was a combination of our internal engineers. We worked with a couple of partners and partnering with AWS, mostly for scale and to help bring forward some of the more advanced concepts that we just weren't ready to, didn't really know a whole lot about. That was the main reason for partnering with Amazon, so they can kind of guide us through how to use some of the tools. The architecture that we created, we did have a third party that helped us put that together, but internal engineers were involved every step of the way, and now they're owning, running, and are building out the platform today. Yes?
Two questions. Your landing or staging area, that's clear.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any standardization in your dish layer? Or is it just unstructured data, everybody dumps it there in any kind of format, and then you go figure out different parts? And the second question, let me ask both maybe.
Okay.
Second question, you're moving data a lot. There's staging, warehousing, data marts. You're replicating data. Any concerns with so much data being duplicated, triplicated?
So to answer the first question, there is structure to the ingestion. A lot of our ingestion today is very batch. So we hold our source systems to very high standards, and we make sure that they are giving us the data in the same format every day. And we do a lot of checking. So we will kick out and reject files if they come in and they're not in the format that we expected. But there is a level of standardization that occurs within the staging area itself. So I would say that there is a good mixture of the two. And we are storing our information in Parquet files in the best possible compressed format that we can. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's replicated across buckets. You'll never see the data point in the same format in the same way in multiple buckets. The information that we're putting in our staging layer has gone through a lot of has gone through some value standardization, some labeling, some enhancements, a lot of the change data capture processes where we're tracking the changes. And then by the time it gets to the next bucket, it's been aggregated up. So in theory, yes, the same information lives there, but never in the same way. So we don't really feel like there's a lot of duplication.
Looks like there's a constant flow of data, right? So is there any streaming there involved? I didn't see any reference to.
Not yet. Not yet. A lot of our ingestion today is batch or calling out to APIs to then create a batch file. So the API call happens once a day. But we are very interested in advancing into more real time, because as we get more sophisticated, our end users are getting more sophisticated and their needs are becoming more sophisticated. We haven't quite determined what that would look like. We have looked at some of the Amazon products. Right? We looked at Kinesis and some of those things, but we're not quite sure which of our internal providers that we get data from would be able to keep up with that, if they even have data available in real time. So there's still a lot of investigation to happen.
Is there any latency observed in the from the point the data gets into the source system of records to all the way through the S3s and then to the Redshift?
I mean, the entire process from when it lands to getting it into Redshift is only a matter of hours. So it's just the standard latency that you would imagine by getting files from a source system in batch and then processing them overnight. Yes?
How do you handle master data management, like putting together global IDs for the same customer across different channels? How do you any guidance there?
We actually have an internal system that does a lot of that master data management for us. So you're interacting with the Wall Street Journal, you have to log in. So I know, we know who you are, and there is an anonymous key that follows you, and every other system that interacts with you generally uses that key. And if we didn't receive that key from whatever source system is giving us the data, there's usually some kind of connection point that we make for the end user within that staging area, so that it becomes a very clean and easy join. Yes.
Do you have like a dashboard, the homepage, so to speak? I mean, people just click on it and kind of they know who's got the rights already, or pick and choose off that. Is that the kind of thing? I mean, just looking at that graphic.
So our visualization tools all have to go through our internal Okta system. So from a traceability standpoint, I know who has access to what. I know how often they're logging in. And then we have turned on some of the logging mechanisms within the tools themselves, so we know. There is, it's not a free-for-all on data, because it is customer data. Some of the stuff that we have will have just general internal revenue numbers, so we try to partition the information to those who are allowed to see it and those who aren't. Yes?
So you mentioned you're using Redshift to do permissioning versus but could you also do permissioning on like other policies and that sort of thing, just go over the schemas and tables, or is it more at the call level?
It was, at the time we did this, right, and we did start this 2 years ago. At the time, we didn't have enough flexibility in bucket policies and schemas. So Redshift was the logical option. We know that there have been some advancements since then, but we do really like the analytical power of Redshift and how it helps return data through to Tableau. So we've stuck with that for now. But we do have a lot of users who do need to spit out really, really large data sets, which we know that that's not what Redshift's bread and butter is. So we are trying to investigate some other kinds of tools to give people access to the data in S3 in a different way. Permissioning is a big thing for us, though, right? We have to make sure that one of the more difficult things that we've encountered is some of the info security guardrails that we've been given, because everybody at the company generates data, but because their applications generate data. We are the only team whose application's sole purpose is to make data available to everybody else. So there's been a lot of challenges to that, and we've had to kind of break a lot of new ground on the info security area and in some of the cloud areas where there are still a lot of things that we know we can't do yet, and we need to find new solutions.
Yeah, you already touched upon the transformation aspect. So one related question on that. So how did you initiate this, right? So you had several system of records. So from there on, probably you identified a certain number of, hey, this content makes sense to us. Did you go any incremental way, or did you go achieve a big bang? You have to show, demonstrate value to your business, right? I'm sure there's somebody asking, show me where the results are every 3 months or something. Even probably less than that. So how did you take this, the whole journey?
We started with data we already knew. So rather than start completely net new, by starting with data we already knew, data we were having the most trouble with, that was the clear starting point so that we could demonstrate value immediately by putting something in the cloud. Huge mountains of clickstream data didn't work well in our on-prem data warehouse. We didn't have the right access to it. So that was the first thing that we kind of brought in and experimented with and just built up from there. So by starting with what we knew, it was an easier journey to learn the technology and not have to learn the data and the technology at the same time. Yes?
Can you describe the process of onboarding a new data set or a new schema? Is there development required, or is there some kind of front end?
Usually the conversation starts with whoever provides the data, so we have to have a conversation about how they can give it to us, and then there's a whole ingestion process that it has to go through. Either it'll meet one of the 3 key ways that we bring data in today, either coming on an on-premise server, being dropped on an SFTP, or being dropped into another S3 bucket somewhere. So we try to make it fit into one of those areas and bring it in and standardize it, versus maybe they can't meet that, and we'll have to develop a brand new way of bringing it in. And then from there, there's a lot of data profiling that has to happen. So before you can even go beyond the ingestion stage, you have to understand what you're playing around with. And sometimes ingesting it is the only way to really make it available. So we do a lot of the kind of data profiling first before even moving on to that staging area and making it available to end users, and kind of talking about what the even logic would be for transformation. Yes?
What you mentioned about machine learning, so what would be the top 2 use cases once you start working on machine learning?
I think our biggest asks at the moment are around just propensity. So propensity to navigate to certain sections, propensity to use the product, really kind of taking that clickstream data and really understand usage patterns and come up with models for how customers use it so that we can really improve their overall experience. That's really what we set out to do. We set out to use customer data to fuel better products and fuel better experiences. Anything else?
Yeah, so is it have a high SLA? I mean, is it mission critical now in your business or not?
We're just about there. So since we've released this, we're working on our adoption. And only by getting more adoption are we only going to feel like it's mission critical. At least from an organizational standpoint, data is critical to everything everybody does every day, which is very different than it was for everybody really years ago. Everybody is more aware of data now, so by really increasing adoption and going out and training and teaching people how to use it, I think it'll slowly start to become more critical to everybody's day-to-day business. And they're still, trying to get data from other places. We're trying to show them how easy it is to use ours. Last question.
It's more like information governance, but how are you baking in like sensitive data management, scanning, looking for like sensitive like info types? I'm more talking about like a data pipeline. Like, are you guys doing any of that? I mean, you mentioned information security. I'm sure information governance. How do you attest to that the data is clean and doesn't have certain things in it when you move it from to the cloud?
It's the data profiling step that's key to that. So by profiling the data, we'll be able to discover if there is sensitive information, and we can make sure that it gets hashed before it even gets available to anybody. Okay, thank you everybody so much. This was great.